This week's Parsha is Parshas Vayechi, and we are Be'ezus Hashem holding at the third shir of Parshas Vayechi, Perek Mem Tes, Pasuk Chav Tes. So we just concluded the Birchas Yaakov, which we saw was a little bit of a misnomer, because although there were brachas, there was also teichacha as well. Regardless, Yaakov Avinu is lying on his bed. He's surrounded not only by his sons, the Rashbam says, by his extended family. He's literally breathing his last breaths. He now turns to his children and Vayetzav Oisam, he commands them. Vayomer Aleim, and he tells them, Ani Nesaf El Ami. I am going to be gathered back to my nation, which is a kinui of I'm going to die. Kivru oisi alav oisai. I want to be buried together with my ancestors. Ela ma'ara asher b'stei Efron achiti. I want to be buried exactly where they're buried, and that is in the cave that's in the field that once upon a time belonged to Efron achiti. Ba'ma'ara asher b'stei hamachpela. In the ma'ara, the cave that's in the field of Machpela. Remember, Ma'aras HaMachpela was called such, according to some Rishonim, because it was a Ma'ara in a field that was called Machpela. Asher al Pnei Mamre, which is facing the plains of Mamre, Be'eretz Canaan, in the land of Canaan. Asher Kana Avram es Asad meis Efron achite al chuzas cover. It's that field, it's that Ma'ara that my grandfather Avram Avinu bought from Efron achite, and the reason he bought it was for it to be an achuzas cover. It should be a burial place for his descendants. Shama Kavru es Avram ve'es Sarah Ishtai. That's where they buried Avram and his wife Sarah. Shama Kavru es Yitzchak ve'es Rivka Ishtai. That's where Yitzchak and Rivka were buried. V'shama kavarti es Leah. It's over there that I buried Leah. Miknei hasada v'hama'ara asher boy me'es b'nei ches. Again, Yaakov Avinu is describing Ma'aras HaMachpela. He says it's the field and the Ma'ara that I acquired from the Bnei Ches. Now the truth is, this is something we spoke about in the beginning of Parshas Chayesara. Who did Yaakov Avinu buy Ma'aras HaMachpela from? Not from the Bnei Ches. He bought it from Ephron. He negotiated, however, with the Bnei Ches. And there's a big discussion. Why was Avram negotiating with the Bnei Ches? The Mahalach we spoke about was the Archaim HaKadosh that says they had Dina de Bar Metzra, but regardless, Yaakov Avinu cannot have been more clear. This is on the Rachel Bitcha Haktana level. I want to be buried in Ma'aras HaMachpela. It's the Ma'ara, it's in the field that once belonged to Efron achiti. It's the Ma'ara that's in the field of Machpela. It's facing Mamre. It's in the land of Canaan. It's the field that before I bought from Ephron, or before my grandfather bought from Ephron, he negotiated with the Bnei Ches. It's over there that I want to be buried. Vayechal Yaakov letzavis esmanov. And when Yaakov concluded instructing his family, Vayesoif raglov el hamita, he gathered his feet into his bed. Vayigva vayeyosef el amav. And Yaakov Avinu, the Bechir ha'avos, he left the world. He passed away. Two interesting things. Number one, in the beginning of the parasha, Yaakov Avinu instructs Yosef, L'misha hayechelis biyadei, Rashi says, to be the one that's going to be involved with taking his body up to Canaan and burying him in the Ma'aras HaMachpela. Over here, Yaakov Avinu tells the rest of his sons as well. So as much as his initial instinct was, let me instruct Yosef, but Lemaisa, at the end, in his final moments, he incorporated this commandment, this tzivui, not only to Yosef, but to his other sons as well. Another thing worth mentioning, Vayichal Yaakov letzavis esbanov, Vayesoif raglav el hamita. He took his feet and he put them on his mita. Rashi says, Vayesoif raglav, hichnis raglav. Literally, it means exactly what it sounds it means. What does that mean, though? Vayesoif raglav, Vayigva, Vayeyosef el amav. These are different synonyms of death that the Torah uses to describe what we know as Misa. What does it mean, Vayesef Raglav? The Rashbam in Pshutei Shel Mikra says that if you go back to the beginning of the parsha, when Yaakov Avinu arrived together with Ephraim and Manasseh, and he showed up to bid a farewell and to get a bracha. So the pasuk says, "Vayagid li Yaakov." They informed Yaakov, "Vayomer hine bincha Yosef ba'ilach." Your son Yosef is coming towards you. Vayischazik Yisrael. So Yisrael used any strength that he had. Vayeshev al amita, and he sat up on the bed. Says the Rashbam, in his very, very curt words, Yaakov Avinu was sitting from then up until now. He was still sitting. Yaakov was very shvach. It took a tremendous amount of strength for him to sit. Vayischazik Yisrael. Vayeshev al amita. It's a pasuk in the Torah. It required a lot of effort. But Yaakov Avinu was sitting for this extended period of time, despite the fact that it was very difficult. Now, when he was finished commanding his children, giving them the brachas, and now this last tzava, vayesayif raglov, he took his feet, he put them back on the bed. They're not hanging from the side of the bed anymore because he's not sitting. Now he's actually lying down. Vayigva vayeyasif alamav. Why is this Rashbam interesting? Number one, because it's interesting, but also you see from here that the Rashbam understood that everything in Parshas Vayechi all happened in one sitting, literally. It all happened in one shot. So Yaakov is very not well. They tell everybody the mishpach has to come together. First, Yosef, Ephraim, and Menashe come, and they get a yechidus. And then afterwards, Yaakov says, "Hey, Yosfu, now I want you to bring the entire family together." And they come, and they get the brachas, and the teichacha, and then Vayitzav Oisam, he gives them this final tzivoy, and then the pasuk says, "Vayigva vayiyasef alamav." But the Rashbam says, "Mefurish, everything in the beginning of Parshas Vayechi happened in one sitting." Interesting. Either way, Perek Nun, the final Perek, really the last leg here of Parshas Vayechi of Sefer Bereshis. So Yaakov Avinu just left this world. Says the pasuk, "Vayipol Yosef al pnei Aviv." Yosef fell on the face of his father. Vayef Galov, he cried on him. Vayishak loy, and he kissed him. It's interesting. Yaakov was not alive, but Yaakov Avinu, who's lying there, having just passed away, Yosef gets so overwhelmed with emotion that he falls on him, he starts crying on him, and he kissed him. Vayitzav Yosef es avodav es haroifim. And then Yosef did something very, very surprising. We've read this pasuk 1,000 times, but if you think about it and you meditate on this for a second, it really is very interesting. Yosef turns to his avodim, his king, as haroifim, specifically the doctors, lachnoid es afif, and he commands them to go and to do what's known as chanata on his father. Vayachantu haroifim es Yisrael. They follow his instructions and they did exactly what they were commanded to do. So what does it mean, lachnoid es aviv? So if you look at Rashi says, inyan merkachas besamimu. So we're going to get back to this soon. But for now, Rashi says they embalmed him. So they wrapped him in some sort of linen that had besamim and things that smell good. The idea was to be able to preserve Yaakov's body a little bit. Why was this necessary? It was necessary because Yaakov was going to be buried in Canaan. Not just that, we're going to see in the next psukim that the Mitzrim had this custom that they didn't allow some very dignified person to just be buried, but there was some long mourning process, a very drawn out funeral, so to speak, and Yaakov was going to be subjected to this. So to make sure that his body wasn't going to decay and wasn't going to decompose, which would be improper for the holy body of Yaakov Avinu, so Yosef HaTzadik instructs his roifim, lachnoit es aviv, and they did exactly what they were told to do. The pasuk says, how long was this procession? It took 40 days. So there was a 40-day process of this chanata, and the reason is because that was Egyptian custom. After that, there was another 30-day mourning process, which means that if you add the 40 days plus the 30 days, what you end up with is a 70-day period where Vayifku Oisem Mitzrayim, the entire land of Egypt, cried for Yaakov. Now, why was everybody so taken aback? Why is everybody so bizarre? Because Yaakov Avinu passed away. So, Pasha, you could say he's the father of the king, right? Or the second in command. And as a result, he's a very respected person, and he was given some sort of royal farewell. But if you look at Rashi says, Lafisha Bolehem Bracha L'Ragloi. The reason that they were so bizarre was because when Yaakov Avinu had come to Mitzrayim, he brought a lot of bracha. Number one, Shekola Harav. This is Rashi L'Shitasek, not like the Ramban. Rashi says that the hunger only lasted for 2 years. What happened after year 2? Yaakov Avinu showed up, and that changed everything. Additionally, the main Nilus was gebenched as a result of Yaakov Avinu living in Mitzrayim, and it's because of all the bracha that came along. Now they understood they lost this great tzaddik, this incredible Mekayr HaBracha. Therefore, they were very sad, and they cried to him for a period of 7 days. Pasuk says, "Vayavru yemei bechisai." The 70 days of bechia passed. Vayidabru Yosef el beis Paroi leimar. So Yosef then went and he sent the following message to the house of Paroi: Im no matzasi chen be'einechem. If I am noisechen by you, dabru na ba'oznei Paroi leimar. Please give over the following message to Paroi. So Yosef now has a message for Paroi, but he doesn't talk to Paroi directly. Vayidaber Yosef el beis Paroi. He talks to the house of Paroi. Leimar. Leimar means azoy tzizugin. Go give over the following message. What's the message? Im no matzasi chen be'einechem dabru na ba'oznei Paroi leimar. Please request the following. What is that? Avi hishbiyani leimar. My father made me swear, saying, I'm going to die, and I want to be buried in the land of Canaan, in the caver that I had purchased. So my request now is to fulfill the shvuah that I made to my father. So please, can you go to Paroi, and you can please give over the message and say that my father made me swear, so that now Yosef talking, Elana, please, I want to be able to fulfill what it is I said I was going to fulfill. Why couldn't Yosef talk directly to Paroi? Yosef sends a message through Paroi. Yosef is a nichnas v'yotzeh by Paroi. If you want to get a message to Paroi, the person you have to know is Yosef. He's the protector, right? So why would Yosef have to make a shliach to go speak to Paroi? If you look at the Sforno, he says one line: Ki ein lavoi el shar hamelech belavush sak. Right, where does that line come from? Megillas Esther. It's inappropriate for someone that's mourning to stand in front of the king, and it's for that reason that Yosef was in a situation, because he was mourning, he couldn't talk directly to Paroi, and being that he couldn't talk directly to Paroi, so therefore he had to send a message. I saw the Archaim HaKadosh says a nice knech here also. Yosef said, "Dabru na." What does na mean? So in this context, for sure, na means please, right? It's a request. Na also means now. Yosef turned to the Chevra and he says, you have an opportunity of a lifetime now. Why? He says, how often is it that I need a favor from you? Almost never. The chances of me, Yosef, having to come on to you for a favor is highly unlikely. Punkt now. Now, the situation is that I need a favor from Paroi. I can't talk to Paroi directly, and really, if you're going to intervene on my behalf, I'm going to owe you one. So na is neloshem bakasha, but at the same time, it also means right now you have an opportunity that I don't know if you're ever going to have again. To do the king a favor and for the king to owe you one, that's an opportunity of a lifetime. So Yosef tells the Chevra, he says, Dabru na, but na also is miloshen zman. Do it achshav. Do it right now. I'm giving you a tremendous opportunity. Either way. So Paroi hears what Yosef wants. Paroi said, Alei ukfares avicha kasher hishbiyacha. He gave over the message. He said, go bury your father. He made you swear that you would do so, and that's what you should do. Rashi says that what Paroi was saying when he said kasher ishbiyecha was the only reason I'm allowing you to do this is because of the fact that you swore. Had you not sworn, then I wouldn't have allowed you to do it, which was what the Ramban spoke at in the beginning of the parsha, the pikchas of Yaakov. Yaakov was a chacham, haroya es hanoilad. He was a chacham that Einav is Beroshai. He understood that this moment was going to happen, and there was going to be a big ask with a drum roll to see how exactly Paroi was going to respond, and he felt that if there was a shvuah, Paroi would honor the shvuah, and it's exactly what he did. Vayomer Paroi aleu kfares avicha. Didn't stop there. Kasher hishbiyecha. And here Rashi speaks it out, that it's because of the shvuah, that's the reason that I'm allowing you to do this. So the pasuk says, Vayal Yosef likbar esafif. So Yosef went up What does it mean he went up? He traveled north. He went to Eretz Canaan. Eretz Yisrael's Gevayim Mikol Haratzos, right throughout the Torah. Whenever they're going from Mitzrayim to Eretz Yisrael, it's always Vayal. So he went up Likbarasav, Vayalu Itai, but he didn't go by himself. So who went along with him? Kol Avdei Parai. All the servants of Parai. Ziknei Beisai. The Chasheva people from his government. V'chol ziknei Eretz Mitzrayim. In fact, all the Chasheva people in the land of Egypt went. V'chol beis Yosef, Yosef's house went. Ve'echav and his brothers. Ubeis Aviv and his father's house, the extended family. Rak tapam v'tzoinam ufkaram ozvu beretz Goshen. The only thing that was left behind were the little children, additionally the cattle. Vayal imay gam rechev gam parashim. In addition to that, he took chariots, and he took the people that ride the chariots. Vayhi machane kovid ma'od, and the machane was kovid ma'od. Rabbeinu Bechaya makes a little bit of a deal. He says that if you count all the people that went up with Yosef to Mitzrayim, matzinu tisha kitos sha'olu imay l'kayvrei. You find 9 groups of people. Vayal Yosef likbar Aviv, vayalu itai kol avdei parai. That's number 2. The Rabbeinu Bechaya teaches the Avdei Parai as the Sorim. Ziknei Beisai is 3. V'chol Ziknei Eretz Mitzrayim is 4. The Beis Yosef, that's the family of Yosef, that's 5. Echav, his brothers, that's 6. Ubeis Aviv, the extended family would be 7. Vayal Imay Gam Rechev, and then the chariots went, and Gam Parashim, and the Parashim went as well. So this was an incredible farewell. This was a very impressive entourage, where literally 9 different groupings of people go together to escort, to be Malavi Yaakov to the land of Canaan. So the pasuk says, "Vayavoyu ad Geirin ha'atad." They arrived in a place called Geirin ha'atad. So a Geirin is a threshing floor. An atad is a thorn. So what does it mean, Geirin ha'atad, like the threshing floor of thorn bushes? So Rashi says what it means is the Geirin was mukif atadim. It was surrounded by these thorn bushes. Asher be'evra Yarden, where was it? It was on the other side of the Yarden. This is a big discussion in the Rishonim what this means. According to most Rishonim, Evra Yarden here means it was in Eretz Canaan. So usually when you think of Evra Yarden, you're in Canaan and you're thinking of what's going on the other side of the Jordan River. But over here, Fakir, they're coming from Egypt, and as a result, Evra Yarden is on the Canaan side. So according to most Rishonim, Geirin ha'atad was in Canaan proper. Vayispedu sham misped gadol v'kavod ma'od, and they were masped him with an incredible hesped. Vayasla aviv, and when they were there in Geirin ha'atad, they sat shiva and they made evel shivas yamim. So in addition to the 70 days of mourning, of crying that took place in Mitzrayim, now there was another 7 days. Vayasla aviv evel shivas yamim. By the way, this pasuk is the makar to the idea of shiva being 7 days. So the people that were living in Canaan saw this mourning that was taking place in Geirin ha'atad, and they said, I don't know who died, but obviously somebody very important in Egypt. And this is an Evel Kaveh, this is a very heavy, very intense mourning. Al King Karashma Avel Mitzrayim, and it's for that reason what was previously known as Geirin ha'atad, now all of a sudden got a new name, Avel Mitzrayim, Asher be'evra Yarden. Where is it? It's in Evra Yarden. Again, this is a little tricky. It's on the Canaan side of Ever Hayarden. Vayasu ban of Loi, the pasuk says, Cain, Kashet Sivan. And then his sons went and they did what they were told to do. What was that? Be involved, be engaged in the burial. Vayisnu oisei ban of Arza Canaan. The sons of Yaakov took Yaakov to Canaan. Vayikbru oisei b'ma'aras te'am achpela ashakana Avram es hasada lachuzas kever me'es efren achiti al pnei mamre chazara. And they went ahead and they buried him in the ma'aras hamachpela. It's interesting that as much as the parsha starts with Yaakov telling Yosef, I want you to be the one to be in charge of making sure that I'm not buried in Mitzrayim, but to the contrary, I'm buried in the Ma'aras HaMachpelah. At the end of Yaakov's life, he went and he commanded all his sons, and Lamaisa, in real time, when the pasuk describes the Kfura, it says, Vayasu banav loy, Vayisu oisoi banav arza Canaan, Vayikpiru lashon rabim oisoi. At the end of the day, it sounds like all the brothers were really very, very much involved in the Kfura of Yaakov Avinu. Pasuk says, after the Kfur Vayoshav Yosef Mitzrayma, Hu ve'echa v'chol ha'olam itay likbar esaviv, achri cover esaviv, after the Kfura took place, so Yosef and his brothers and all the chevra, the 9 groups that Rabbeinu Bechai talks about, they all went back to Mitzrayim, and when did they go? Achri cover esaviv, sounds a little bit redundant. We have a raid by a famous word from the Rogatchover Goyen. Not for now, but the bottom line is, they returned and they went back to Mitzrayim. And we're going to exhale. We're going to make a Hosofa, and we're going to stop right here, right before the very, very end of Parshas Vayechi. So just a few ha'aris in terms of understanding these few psukim that we just learned together. Number 1, as soon as Yaakov Avinu passed away, Vayitzav Yosef es avodov es haroifim lachnoit es afef. Yosef commanded the doctors that worked for him to do this process, lachnoit es afef. Vayachantu haroifim es Yisrael. Vayimlu loy arbaim yoim. In fact, they did this for 40 days. Ki kein yimlu yemei achanutim. Because this was the minig in Egypt, that they would do this embalming process, and it would take 40 days. Vayivku oisei Mitzrayim shivim yoim. And if you count those 40 days, plus an additional 30 days that they mourned and they cried for Yaakov, what you end up with is, there was this 70-day period where Yaakov Avinu's body is just lying, and the Egyptians are crying for him, and they're mourning for him. Now, this is not to be confused with the Shiva that the sons of Yaakov Avinu observed. That's something that happened when they first came to Canaan. That's something that happened in Geirin Ha'atad, which very much caught the fascination of the Canaanim that were living there. But the bottom line is there was this process of Vayachantu Haroifim Es Yisrael, 40 days in line with Egyptian custom, plus another 30 days. There's some 70-day process that just took place. Now we said, Rashi says, what does it mean, lachnoit es aviv? Inyan merkachas b'samamo. It's some process of wrapping the body in perfumes and besamim to make the body smell good so that it won't decay and it won't decompose. But I think it's impossible to read these psukim with mature eyes and not wonder out loud, does this have something to do with the ancient Egyptian custom known as mummification? Meaning, was Yaakov mummified? Is that really what took place? Now, if you research the mummification process a little bit, there was a very, very important feature to it, which is not the way the Rishonim seem to describe Vayachantu Haroifim Es Yisrael, or at the very least the way Rashi seems to describe it. And that is, an integral part of the mummification process was the internal organs of the person that died would be removed. So, you don't have to fact check me, but that's be'erich the way this worked. They would remove the brain, they would remove the liver. So there were internal organs, critical internal organs, that were removed, and there was this idea that if you're going to do that, that's going to allow the body to last longer. There was a big pikris, this whole inyan, and that's the way they used to go about and do it. When Rashi says that what does lachnoit es aviv mean, inyan merkachas besamimu, it sounds a little bit like Rashi is coming lafuke, the mummification process. All it was merkachas besamim. Now, that too was part of the mummification process, but Rashi seems to be diluting a little bit what took place. It was just about merkachas besamim, and the svara behind it is that really Chalila, Yaakov Avinu is not becoming a mummy. That's not what's going on over here. But rather, what's going on with Yaakov Avinu is that Yaakov Avinu's body is being preserved, and the reason is because they have to follow this Egyptian custom. It is what it is. They're in Egypt right now. Additionally, they're going to have to bring Yaakov to the Maras HaMachpelah, which is going to take a little bit of time. So it makes sense that Yosef HaTzadik has these roifim, he has these chevra working for him, and as a result, let's go about this and let's do this. It is interesting. There's a medrash where the Medrash brings the Machloikis, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi and the Chachamim, where the Yosef HaTzadik was right for having the doctors go ahead and do this process, or whether he was wrong for doing it. The Medrash says as follows. It's right here in Parshas Vayechi. It's Kuf Gimel. Kuf/Gimel. Lama meis Yosef b'fnei Yaakov. Why did Yosef die before his brothers? Rabbi v'Rabbanon. It was Machlokes Rabbi and the Rabbanon. Rabbi Yama Rabbi said, Al shechonat es aviv. It's because of this. He had no right doing this. This was wrong. It was disgraceful. And al shechanat es aviv, it's for that reason that Yosef HaTzadik died before his brothers. Amalei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rabbi continued and said that HaKadosh Baruch Hu came to Yosef and he told him, I couldn't take care of my tzaddik's body. I needed you to go ahead and have your Egyptian kishafmachers go and do something that, let's be honest, is inappropriate for a tzaddik. Loi kacha marti loi. Didn't I tell Yaakov, altiri toilas Yaakov, which means altiri toilas as Yaakov. Yaakov, you're not going to see worms. Your body is not going to have any shlita for any of these external forces. Certainly, it's not going to decay and it's not going to decompose. This is not something that you should have done. And as a result, said Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who's a Gilgal of Yaakov Avinu, right? We spoke about that in Parshas Vayishlach. But says Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Lama meis Yosef b'fnei Yaakov. It's al shechanat es aviv. It's because of this Maisa Vayechantu. But the Gemara says, Rabbanan Amri, the Rabbanan says no. That the reason Yosef HaTzadik instructed that Yaakov Avinu's body should go through this process is who should tziva oisam sheyachtu oisai. It's because Yaakov had told Yosef to do it. You know how you know that? Hadod d'chsev, because one of the last psukim that we just read was Vayasu bonov loy kein kasha tzivam. And say the Rabbani, you know what that pasuk means? Every single thing that Yosef and the brothers did is exactly what they were commanded to do. So if that's the case, it can't be that Yosef was punished because Yosef is just following orders. He's doing exactly what his father told him to do. So says the Medrash, Al-Daita the Rabbi Nicha. According to Rabbi, that says that Yosef did something wrong. We understand why Yosef died first. About Daitin the Rabbanon. But according to the Rabbanon, why did Yosef die before his brothers? Said the Rabbanon. Because Karav L'chamisha Pa'amim. It's interesting. Almost 5 times. You have to know what that means. Almost 5 times you find this idea that Yosef HaTzadik is listening to his sons, his brothers, refer to Yaakov as Avdecha, as Yosef's slave. Yehuda Omer, Avdecha Avi, V'Ushaymea V'Shaysek. And Yosef didn't say a word, and it's for that reason he died first. Keep it over aim as Laman Yarichon Yomecha. And this Einish is L'chura, the Mida Keneged Mida. It's the inverse of that. It's for that reason Yosef died prematurely. But the bottom line is, it seems to be a machlokes Tanaim, whether or not Yosef did something wrong when it was Vayechantu haroifim es Yisrael. But again, stating that, it sounds like this chanata is not the ancient Egyptian mummification, but it's more like Rashi says, Inyan merkachas besamimhu. Stating that, you knew this was coming. If you take a look at the Abarbanel, right here on this pasuk, the Abarbanel says as follows. Just going to read one paragraph. Vayitzav Yosef es avodav haroifim. Shahayu avadav, lefi shahayu noyeg betachsisei hamelachim, ad shahayu lo roifim b'meleches hachanata hamiyuchedes l'melachim. So Yosef had a staff of avadim that were doctors, and they knew how to perfect this process. Veheim chantu es Yisrael, and they're the ones that did this chanata to Yaakov Avinu. V'chanata hi, says the Abarbanel, what is chanata? Hoitzas hamoyach, it's removing the brain, v'halev and the heart, v'hakaved and the liver, v'chena me'ayin and all the innards, v'hamerirus mitoich haguf, v'yimshechu haguf, and then they would smear the guf mibayis u'michutz b'shemen afar samoy, v'yimale akrovaya mibayis u'michutz mimine b'samim hamiyavshin lachluchas haguf, v'tzorich b'chol yom lahachlef as b'samim. Every single day they had to change. U'b'toich yomim yishar haguf yavesh v'kasha al maskuntoi b'lishinui ever me'evarav v'nira hameis ki'ilu yashin. And the mace looks like he's sleeping. V'lo yisafish v'lo yasriach v'lo yisrachaku mimenu b'nei adam v'chulu v'chulu v'chulu. He says that's exactly what happened to Yaakov Avinu. He describes clearly what's known as this ancient Egyptian mummification process. In fact, he goes further and he says that the last pasuk of Parshas Vayechi says regarding Yosef, Vayomas Yosef ben Me'av Esar Shonim, Vayachantu Oisai. It was the same exact thing. That's what they did to Yosef. And he says, if you understand the mummification, the atzamois, the structure of the body would stay intact perfectly. But the basar, the flesh, is what would obviously go away. And says the Abarbanel, that's why the body of Yosef is always referred to in Chazal as the Atzmois Yosef, because the Atzmois were intact. The structure was perfectly intact. It was just the basar that wasn't intact anymore. That's what became Yovesh, and that's what Yosef HaTzadik's Oren is always referred to as the Atzmois Yosef. It's because the Atzmois were literally perfectly intact because he went through this process of Chanata. What's even more interesting is the Tosfos Yontif. The Tosfos Yontif, in his Sefer Tosfos Yontif. Tosfos Yontif wrote a lot of Svar. But this is in a Sefer Tosfos Yontif. His Pirush HaMishnayos in the 4th parak of Masechtas Pesachim. So it's going on the Mishnah that says, Shisha Dvarim Asa Chizkiyahu HaMelech. Al Shloisha Hoyduloi, V'al Shloisha Loi Hoyduloi. And one of the things that Chizkiyahu HaMelech did was, he was Girer Atzmois Aviv Al Mita Shal Chavolim. He took that Atzmois of his father, and he schlepped them, right? He did something disgraceful. He wanted it to be a kapara of him. So this was Chizkiyahu HaMelech's idea that he had to try to get some tikkun, some sort of kapara for his father, who was the big Rasha, his father Achaz. And that Mishnah of Girer Atzmois Aviv, the Tosfos Yontif talks about this inyan of Atzmois HaMalachim and the way they used to bury them, and they tried keeping their body intact. He quotes the Chanata process that was done to Yaakov and Yosef, and then the Parshas Vayechi, and he quotes the Abarbanel. He quotes the Abarbanel by name, and he says, Ayin Sham, Masha Kosav. And it sounds like the Tosfos Yontif was signing off to what the Abarbanel said. Not for now, but there's a tshuva from the Chassam Sofer, and this is in Yeridei Cheluk Beis, it's in Siman Shin Lamed Vav. The topic of the tshuva is Netichas Gufa L'Tzorech Refuah. So taking different body parts, organ donations, right? Those types of things. V'nyani Refuah. There's a very important tshuva from the Chassam Sofer on this Inyan, and in that tshuva he quotes this Abarbanel, who's quoted by the Tosfos Yontif. He brings that the Tosfos Yontif quoted the Abarbanel's Chiddush. He says from the Zohar Kodesh, it's Mavur, the Chalilah, to think that's what happened to Yaakov Avinu. They actually removed his organs. I mean, that's a massive, massive Chiddush to even say. But the bottom line is, Ayin Sham and the Heilig Chassam Sofer. One other footnote as it relates to this, we spoke about this once upon a time in a raid bite. There's a Mishnah Melech that's in Hilchas Avol Perek Gimel Halacha Aleph. The Mishnah Melech says as follows, just the words: Nishalti al ha mem vav mem yud yud aleph. I think it's the mummy, right? Nishalti al ha-mummy, shemoichin ha-koyhanim, ishapelim evedoloi. So it seems like there were koyhanim that were engaged in some geschäft that involved mummies. A kohen is not allowed to be metama to a mace. So Mishnah Melech was asked to Shiloh, is this okay what they're doing, or is it not okay what they're doing? V'hine, lefi masheshamati, mummy halazu, imba basa klal. Doesn't have any basar. Elat samois, it has atsamois, va'or, it has skin, ha-choyfa oisam. V'hen yeveshim ma'oid, said I asked questions. End of the day, he gets involved. That some is metamek Kisaira, so he's not even sure what the shaila is at first, and then he goes through it. There's a whole shaila from the Mishnah Melech regarding a mummy. But the Vayechantu Oisai, as relates to Yaakov and Yosef, happening in ancient Egypt, is fascinating. One footnote to this is, if you do a cursory search on exactly how mummification worked, it's described as having been a 70-day process, which is fascinating, because the pasuk says that it was kichein yimlu yemei hachanutim, and it says something about 70 days. Now it's very possible they got the 70 days from this pasuk in the Torah, making an assumption that that's what happened over here, right? But the bottom line is, regardless, definitely something very interesting. That's the first order. The second order is, so the end of Parshas Vayechi describes the Misa and then ultimately the Kfura of Yaakov Avinu. There's a very important Gemara. It's a Gemara in Masechta Soita, Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, that tells the rest of the story, and I think it's kedai to just learn together a few lines of Gemara. The pasuk says, "Vayavoyu ad goyren ha'atad." So Yosef and the brothers, all 9 groups of people that came along to be Malava Yaakov Avinu, they arrived in goyren ha'atad. Says the Gemara, "V'chi goyren yesh lo la'atad." Atad are thorns. You don't make a threshing floor out of thorns. So Rashi says that, what does it mean? It was a goyren that was surrounded by atad. That's Pshutei Shal Mikra. Rabbi said, I'm going to tell you the Chazal. Yaakov. That what happened over here is there were a lot of kings that came, and they all took off their crowns to the point that Yaakov Avinu's body was surrounded by crowns. Similar to a goyren that's surrounded by an atad. So it's not so much that it was a physical goyren atad, but goyren atad, metaphorically speaking, what were the thorns? The ksarim that's surrounding this goyren. The crowns are surrounding Yaakov Avinu. And the rest of the story is Shabo b'nei Esav Ubnei Yishmael, Ubnei Keturah. So when we talk about Yaakov Avinu's extended family having been present at this royal funeral, it's not just Yaakov Avinu's mishpacha, but it was the Bnei Esav, it was the Bnei Yishmael, it was the Bnei Keturah. Initially, when they came ready for fight. But when they saw the crown of Yosef HaTzadik was hanging on the urn of Yaakov, Natlu Kulan Kisreim, they all removed their crowns, Utlon Baroinish Yaakov, and they did the same thing. Tana, we learned in the Brayso, that if you do the math, you count, you want to know how many crowns there were? There were 36 crowns. The Gemara continues. This was a huge hesped, something very, very unique. Tana, we learned in the Brayso, Afilu Susin, Va'afilu Chamoiren. Kivan, that even the Susim and even the Chamoiren, they too partook in this funeral, and that's what the pasuk means when it says Vayispadu sham mispad God of a kavod ma'od. It was the braying and all the noises that all the animals make. That's included in this tremendous hesped. The Gemara continues. As soon as they came to the Mar Samach Pela, right? This is the rest of the story with the Hey Ayidiyah. Also, Esav come back. All of a sudden, Esav. We haven't heard from him in a long time. All of a sudden, Esav, right, since the end of Parshas Vayishlach, shows up. Amalahem, he turns to the Olam and he says, this place is called Mamre Kiryas HaArba Hichef. Now, Esav's not quoting Rabbi Yitzchak, but we're going to say over what Esav said in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak, because Rabbi Yitzchak's the one who gave us this halacha. Kiryas Arba. Why was it called Kiryas Arba? Arba Zugos Hayu. Because there were 4 peers of people that were buried there. Adam v'Chava, Avram v'Sara, Yitzchak v'Rivka, and Yaakov v'Leah. So Esav says that as it relates to Yaakov and Leah, l'chayra, Yitzchak and Rivka have 2 sons. So I should be entitled to one, and my brother should be entitled to one. Now, Iyu covered the Leah, but he already buried his wife Leah there. Which means that the one left over caver really belongs to me. So when the Bnei Yaakov heard this, they said, Zabinta, you already sold your chelik. Amalu, 1 second. Hida Sabina Becherusa. Pshitusa Mizabina. Yeah, I know. For an Izid Adashim, the beginning of Parshas told us, I sold my Bechera, but I never sold my basic share that I'm supposed to get. Pishnayim. Enochinami. But I'm still entitled to something. Amrulay in. It's not true. You sold that as well. What's the makar to that? What did Yaakov Avinu say? Bekivri asher korisi li be'eretz Canaan shamatik bereni. Yaakov Avinu said that I want you to bury not in the field that my Zayd Avram Avinu bought, in the field that korisi, that I was korisi. It's a lashon mechira. She came to kraki ayam karin the mechira kira. Amalahu. Either way, Esav said, really? If that's the case, havalu yigarta. I want to see a shtar mechira. What? I'm not going to take your word for it. Bring a shtar that says that I actually sold my chelik in the Ma'aras HaMachpelah, and then we have a deal. Amruleh, they said, Igarta ba'ar de Mitzrayim. The Igeris is back in Mitzrayim. Okay, so then somebody should get it. So they said, Uman Nezel, who should go? Nezel Naftali. Naftali should be the one that goes. Why? The Kalul Ki Hayalta. Because Naftali was able to run very fast. The Chsiv, Naftali, Ayala Shlucha, Hanoisein Imrei Shofer. Rabavo said, Al Tikri Imrei Shofer, Elo Imrei Sefer. And he was the Ayala Shlucha who went to get the Sefer, says the Gemara. So they're all waiting to bury Yaakov Avinu. Right? This is many, many, many days in the making. And they now all of a sudden have this whole vikuach going on over here. There's a din Torah. This was unexpected, right? At the last second, all of a sudden, they get dropped with this bombshell. Somebody's claiming that he's a shutaf over here, and as a result, he wants to be buried. So the Gemara says, Chushem bereid Dan Taman Hava. Dan had a son, Chushem, and he was standing there. V'yakirin le udne. He was a cheresh. He wasn't able to hear. And he's just looking around, and he sees that everybody's just waiting. What's going on over here? Amaluhus, he told the Olam, my hi. They explained to him. They said, "Come, He says, you see that guy over there? He doesn't want to let us bury the Zayda until we bring a shtar that says that really the Zayda bought this Maras HaMachpelah from him." Amalahu. He said, He said, what's going to be until Naphtali comes back? He said, what, the Zayda's going to lie over there? He didn't even wait for an answer. Immediately, Shak al-Kulfa picked up a baseball bat, Machya Areshe, he hit him in the head, Notran Eine, the eyes of Esav fell out of their sockets. He hit Esav in the back of his head. So his eyes fell out. And Naflu Akara de Yaakov, they fell literally on the lap of Yaakov. Paschinu Yaakov le'ene. When Yaakov saw that the eyes of Esav just fell on him. He opened his eyes, va'achich, and he smiled. He laughed. V'hainu d'chsiv yismach tzadik. The tzadik, Yaakov Avinu, was going to be happy. Ki chaza nakam pa'am of yirchatz bedam harasha. But Oisa Shah at that moment says the Gemara, Neskayim nevuah shel Rivka. The nevuah of Rivka was Neskayim. D'chsiv lama eshkol gam shnechem yoyim echad. And the Gemara says v'afal gavta misasam loy b'yoyim echad avoy. Even though they didn't die on the same day, kfurasam b'yoyim echad avoy, but the kfura did happen on the same day. And this is the rest of the story. But there's even a rest of the story of the rest of the story. And that is a Tosfos. It's a Tosfos and Masechtes Gittin, Daf Nun Hey Amud Beis, right in the beginning of the Sugya of Kamsa Bar Kamsa. So the Sugya of Kamsa Bar Kamsa begins, actually, in a very Lomdisha context. It talks about the Roman decree known as the Sekrikon. The Sekrikon were people, they were bad guys, and they would come and confiscate the property of the Jews, force them to sell it. From there we pivot into the story of the Romans destroying the second Beis HaMikdash. That's how Kamsa Bar Kamsa makes it into Masechtes Gittin. But the Gzeira of the Sekrikon, the Mishnah says, began in Yehuda. It's a Mishnah. Be Yehuda, Baharugei Milchama, that's where it all started. So Tosfos, on that Mishnah, Gittin 55b, quotes a Yerushalmi. But Yerushalmi, but Rishayna Gazur Gzeira al Yehuda. The initial Gzeira of the Sekrikon was enforced in Yehuda. The reason is, Lafisha Mesiris biyad me'avaisa, because they had a Mesiris from their Zayda, she Yehuda harag Esav, that Yehuda had killed Esav. Dechsiv yadcha ba'irif oivecha, v'tanya nami b'sefri, it's also a sefri, yad of Rav Loi, referring to Yehuda, it's b'shash harag Esav. It's referring to the fact that Yehuda killed Esav. Frei Tosfos, u'pesoif, perakam desaita. The Gemara says at the end of the first parak of Masechta Saita, we just learned the Gemara together. Da'amachushim ben don shak al kulfa umachya reisha de Esav anatra ein of enough lakar de Yaakov. How does it reconcile with the Yerushalmi that says it was Yehuda? Was it Chushim ben don or was it Yehuda? Says Tosfos shemaloi meis ba'isa haka. It could be Chushim ben don gave a good zetz to Esav. It was good enough that it literally knocked his eyes out, but at the same time, he didn't kill him. Adsha Amadol of Yehuda came, and he hit the final blow, the literal Makah B'Patish, and Vahargai, he was the one that killed him. So the rest of the story is that it wasn't Chushim ben Don that killed Esav. Chushim ben Don gave him a gittezetz. He did almost all of it. But you want to know who came in and closed the deal? It was actually Yehuda. Yehuda was the one who put himself out there. He was the one that ultimately killed Esav. But there's the rest of the story. And that's a Ramban. Again, these are all often a Mefurish Shemar Mekaymis. The Ramban talks a little bit about what happened when Yosef and the brothers went back to Mitzrayim. It was the last pasuk that we just learned together, where the pasuk says that after the Kfura finally took place, Vayoshav Yosef Mitzrayim hu ve'echav v'chol ha'ilam itay likbar es aviv achrei kavrei es aviv. So the Rabban quotes Sefer Yosefon. He says, V'chein haya ma'isa ki motzinu b'sefer divrei hayom of Yosef ben Gurion v'zulasei misifrei hakadmonius. That when the Yidden, the brothers, they were on their way back to Mitzrayim, and they had just buried Yaakov, but you know what else they just did? They just killed Esav. But Tzvoi ben Eliphaz ben Esav. V'asa imam kitat alzeh. Esav had a son, Eliphaz, who had a son whose name was Tzvoi. And he came and he was very, very disappointed. You just killed my grandfather. What's going on over here? And he started fighting with them. Until it resulted in a full-fledged war. But Yosef ended up winning this war. And he ended up taking him as a prisoner, together with Mifchar Gedudov, right? What does Gedudov mean? God Gedud Yegudanu Vahu Yagud. Okay, right? Together with the best of his troops, ve'avium Mitzrayim, and he brought them back to Mitzrayim. Va'amad sham betfisa kol yimei Yosef, and Tzvoi remained in Tfisa for the rest of Yosef's life. Ubarach misham. However, after Yosef passed away, he ran away. And he went to this land of Campania, al Kutim, and he became the melech, or not Kutim, and the Kitim, Beroima, in the city of Rome. Al Kol Eretz Italia. Eventually, he became the king of the entire land of Italy. He was the first king of Rome, the first Roman emperor, so to speak. And there's a very famous old Heichal temple that's in Rome. You want to know who built it? It was Safai ben Alifas. So after the brothers went and they killed Esav's family decided they're going to take revenge. And there was this big fight, and Safai, he was the ringleader, he went head to head with Yosef, and ultimately Vatik Bayad Yosef was successful, he was able to defeat him, he took him as a prisoner, eventually he got out, and he went ahead, and he built the city of Rome. And this is a very, very important piece of history that the Ramban quotes for two reasons. Number one, as we said, it's the rest of the story in terms of the kfura of Yaakov Avinu, but also it draws the connection between Esav and Rome. And this is something that the historians and the Rishonim already struggled with a little bit, because we know that throughout Chazal, there's this very, very acute connection between Esav and Romi. And one of the important Marmakoimis, if not the definitive Marmakim of this Indian, is this Ramban, that Ramban quotes at the very, very end of Parshas Vayechi, where the Ramban says that Rome was actually built al Yidei Tzafoi ben Alifas ben Esav. And again, this sort of puts a ribbon on the story of Yaakov Avinu, who was nifter in Mitzrayim, 70 days of b'chia, some sort of embalming process. Eventually he's taken to the land of Canaan, 7 days of mourning in Goyren, Ha'ata, this incredible royal funeral. I mean, the way Chazal described the Levaya of Yaakov Avinu, no one ever had such a Levaya. It's absolutely incredible. Esav ends up being killed. That's the nevuah of Rivka, Lama, Eshkol, Gam, Shneichem, B'yom Echad, even though they didn't die on the same day, but they were buried on the same day. All the soidis of Rosh Hashanah that's buried together with the Avis in the Ma'aras HaMachpelah, and then ultimately the fight that took place on the way back, which results somehow in the founding of Rome, which was a thorn, pun intended, in the side of the Jews for many, many, many generations. But just to end with one final rest of the story. And that's something that only the Heilige Chassam Sofer could say. It's in Torah's Moshe, if you want to see it inside, in Parshas Vayechi. Chazal say, B'tishrei noldu ha'avos, B'tishru mesu ha'avos. Specifically as it relates to Yaakov Avinu, the Svar Maktoshim all bring, that Yaakov Avinu was born on the first day of Sukkot. We know that tzaddikim leave this world on the same day that they arrive in this world. Moshe Rabbeinu was born on Zayin Adar. Moshe Rabbeinu was nifter on Zayin Adar. And if that's the case, as far Makdoshim say, that Yaakov Avinu was nifter on the first day of Sukkot. That's the Heilige Chassam Sofer. I made a little bit of a cheshbon. If Yaakov Avinu was nifter on the first day of Sukkot, and they cried for Yaakov Avinu for 70 days in Mitzrayim, you know what that means? When did they stand up? When did they finish the Bechiyah for Yaakov Avinu in Mitzrayim? It had to have been 70 days after the first day of Sukkot. The first day of Sukkot is Tesvav Tishrei. If you count 70 days, right? 60 days would be Tesvav Kislev. Another 10 days would be Chav Hei Kislev. That means the Bechiyah of Yaakov ended on Chav Hei Kislev. He says, Yesh Loimar. The nirali mishum hachi like kavu yimei Chanukah l'sasan u'lesimcha rak lahodos lahal. He says could be in Pnimius. That's why Chanukah was never instituted as a day of sasan v'simcha. Why not? Everybody knows the Ramah. Why is it not a time of sasan and simcha? It's because the Olam just finished crying for Yaakov Avinu. What are you going to do? You're going to celebrate now? It's not a day for celebration. They're in the middle of the morning for Yaakov Avinu. V'lechein like kavu yimei Chanukah l'sasan u'lesimcha. That it all ended on Chanukah. But then the Chassam Sofer goes a step further. And the Chassam Sofer says that after they finished the 70 days, now they picked themselves up and they went to Canaan to go ahead and bury Yaakov. So when was the kfura of Yaakov Avinu? So the Chassam Sofer says, I can't tell you for sure. I don't know 100%. He says, but we know the Ramban says that it takes approximately 6 days to get from Mitzrayim to Hebron. They were going with a big entourage. Presumably, it would have taken a little bit longer. Additionally, when they came to Canaan, Goyrin Ha'atad, they sat Shiva, they mourned him for another 7 days. Says the Chassam Sofer, it's not rochoik to say shahaya kfurasai, that the kfur of Yaakov Avinu was b'yom yud teves. It happened none other than asara b'teves. It happened about 15 or so days after they had gotten up. Right, it makes sense. It's 6. plus 7, that's 13, but they're going with a whole entourage. It probably takes a little bit more. And that day of Asar B'Tevis is a day that it's a Tzoym L'Doros. Being that being that on that day Esav was also killed, there was a remez that one day, that day of Tzoym will be a Hafech L'Sasan L'Simcha. One day it's going to be a Sasan L'Simcha. In the Kfur of Yaakov Avinu, there's a Nechama. You know what the Nechama is? The Nechama is that Rosh Hashanah Esav is also there. That Esav also got killed on that day. So it's the Shoirish, it's the beginning, it's the first monumental event that took place on this day of Asar B'Tevis. But at the same time, there's also a little bit of Nechama that it's going to be a Hafek L'Sasan L'Simcha because Esav was killed on that day. This Chasam Sofer is like, you don't even know what to do with a Chasam Sofer like this. It's unbelievable. It's straight up Ruach HaKodesh. It's mamish Torah b'shamayim as a Chasam Sofer. But I was just thinking one hergish. Maybe. Everybody knows the Gemara Masechtas Tainis on Daf Hey Amid Beis. Rashi quotes it here in the psukim that we learned together today. The Gemara says Rab Nachman and Rab Yitzchak were yasvi besudasa. They were once eating a suda together. So Rab Nachman turned to Rab Yitzchak and he said, Lema mar milsa, say something in learning. So he said, I can't talk in learning because Rab Yochanan said, you're not allowed to talk in the middle of the suda, which by the way is of course his way of talking and learning. Either way, Basa the Sa'ad, after they finished the suda, Amalei, so Rab Yitzchak told Rab Nachman, you want to hear something in learning? Now I'm going to tell you something. This Rab Yochanan said, Yaakov Avinu loy mes. Yaakov Avinu never died. Amalei, Rab Nachman said, what? Did you not read the psukim in the end of Parshas Vayechi? V'chi b'chti softu softaya, v'chantu chantaya, v'kavru kavraya. What do you mean? Look what they did. They were hespedim. They even did chanata. They buried him. How could you say Yaakov Avinu lemes? Amalei Rav Yitzchak told Rav Nachman, I hear. Aber mikrani doirish. Shenema va'ato al tira avdi Yaakov nom Hashem. V'al techas Yisrael. Ki hineni Moshe Yachem meirachoik. V'esarachem yeretz shavim. Makishu l'zaret. Ma'azari b'chaim. Afu b'chaim. Everybody knows this. Yaakov Avinu was loy mes. The truth is, what does it mean Yaakov Avinu loy mes? So if you look at the last Ramban in Parshas Vayechi, the Ramban explains al Pi Kabbalah, Rabbeinu Bechaya doubles down a little bit on the Kabbalah of the Ramban, and al Pi Kabbalah explains what it means Yaakov Avinu loy mes. But in the Torah from the Chasam Sofer, and in the Torah from the Noda B'Yehuda, and from different tzaddikim, Yaakov Avinu loy mes is Pashat. Because being that Yaakov Avinu was the father of Klal Yisrael, Yaakov Avinu was the one that set Klal Yisrael in motion. Therefore, Yaakov Avinu has a chelik in every mitzvah, every davar tov that any yid ever does. Yaakov Avinu is in the next world, maybe, but he's a hoylech bein ha'omdim because of the fact that every single mitzvah, every davar tov that any yid ever does, this is all adank Yaakov Avinu. The Chasam Sofer said, Yaakov Avinu loy mes. The reason he's loy mes is because he's Avinu, because of the fact that he's our father. It's because of the fact that he's our Zayda, and everything that we do is a credit on the cheshbon of Yaakov Avinu. But Yaakov Avinu was loy mes. Chazal say, Lama nismacha, the misa of Miriam to the Parah Aduma. Lama nismacha, you find the Indian of Misa Tzadikim to Churban Beis HaMikdash. L'lametcha, to teach us, shegdoila Misa Tzadikim kisreifas Beis Elokeinu. There's an Indian that when a tzaddik dies, it's like Sreifas Beis Elokeinu. It could be the messages. Asar B'Tevis was the first day. It's the Shoirish. It's the foundation of Churban Beis HaMikdash. It's the same day that Yaakov Avinu, Lama Eshkol Shneichem Yom Echad. It's the Kfur of Yaakov Avinu. Makes a lot of sense. Misa Sadikim, it's Sreifas Beis Elokeinu. It's Hainu Hach. It's Hachaina. They're very, very similar. But Yaakov Avinu, Chazal say, was loy mes. And even though it was kavru kavraya, there was a levaya, there was a funeral. But that just meant that we can't see Yaakov Avinu anymore. But Pepnimius, Yaakov Avinu is still there. And the message is that even though it's true, we don't have a Beis HaMikdash. And we can't bring karbanis. As it relates to the Makam HaMikdash, the Rambam says if a Tomei goes there today, he's chayiv kares. Because the Kedusha and the Pnimius of the Mikdash is something that we have ad hayom hazeh. The remez of Yaakov Avinu's Petira happening on Asar B'Tevis maybe is related to this Inyan. That we don't see Yaakov Avinu, but we know, every child knows this. Yaakov Avinu loy mes. We don't see the Beis HaMikdash. But at the same time, we have to understand that the Beis HaMikdash is loy mes. The Shechina is there. The Shechina is chai v'kayam. There's a famous word from the Chassam Sofer. It's in Teres Moshe and Parshas Vayechi. Chazal say, Kol ha-mis'abel ha-Yerushalayim zoicha v'roya b'simchasa. So the Chassam Sofer said, Kol ha-mis'abel ha-Yerushalayim zoicha v'roya b'simchasa. Kol ha-mis'abel ha-Yerushalayim, in grammar, yiske v'yira b'simchasa. What does it mean, he's zoicha v'roya b'simchasa? So the Chassam Sofer said that the pasuk says that after Yaakov Avinu lost Yosef, vayemoin lehisnachim, he refused to be comforted. And Rashi says, what do you mean he refused to be comforted? It's because we have a cloud. There's a halacha that once 12 months pass, a person that Nebuch loses a loved one, he's able to come to peace with it on some level. He's able to start putting his life together. But Yosef HaTzadik was alive. The chai is misnachim on the mace, but the chai is not misnachim on the chai. And being that Yosef HaTzadik was alive, so vayemoyin lesnachim, he couldn't accept nechama. There's an inyan of nichum avelim on a mace. There's no inyan of nichum avelim on a chai. Said the Chassam Sofer, Kol ha-mis'abel ha-Yerushalayim. If somebody today could mourn Yerushalayim, if somebody today could be sensitive to the fact that we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, you know what that means? That means the Beis HaMikdash is still alive by him. And if the Beis HaMikdash is alive, he's zoicha v'roya b'simchasa. In an ironic, in a counterintuitive way, the Yid that mourns the destruction of the Churban is living with the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash. If you're mis'abel, if you're a vayemoyin l'snachim, said the Chassam Sofer, not that also, that means that the Kedusha of the Shechina, the Kedusha of the Mikdash is Chai V'Kayim, it's alive. That's maybe some of the oimik in the connection between Asar B'Tevis being the day of the Kfura of Yaakov Avinu, and it also being the day where all the tzaras of Churban Beis HaMikdash began. It's because Sreifas Beis Alikeinu and Misa Sadikim is Hainu Hach and Hachayna. But in Misas Yaakov Chazal when Megalatos this side, and that is Yaakov Avinu Loi Meis. At the same time, the Beis HaMikdash, the Eitzim and the Avonim of the Beis HaMikdash is not something we have. But we understand that the Shechina is still in the Makam HaMikdash, the Shechina is still in the Bati Midrashnis and the Bati Knesias. There's an element of course, the Beis HaMikdash is Loi Meis. There's an element of Kol ha-mis'abel ha-Yerushalayim, not Yiske v'yir b'simchasa, Zoiche v'roya b'simchasa. Maybe that's a little bit of the pnimius of the connection of this Ruach HaKodesh Tigger Chassam Sofer, that Yaakov Avinu's Kfura took place on Asara B'Tevis.